The United States Supreme Court today, in a 6-3 ruling, said that the federal government far exceeded its authority when it decided to ban so-called bump stocks, an accessory that attaches to rifles that allows them to bounce off of the shoulder and then initiate another trigger pull, allowing users to fire lots of ammunition. But they said, you can't just ban these things. You need a law to do that. Congress needs to be involved. For more on this, I want to bring in Mark Smith. He's a constitutional attorney, host of the Four Boxes Diner YouTube channel, and the author of the book, First They Came for the Gun Owners. Mark, great to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, Vince, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, and I'm curious about your thoughts about this ruling today from the Supreme Court, sir.
Well, I think this is a major vindication, Vince, for the rule of law, and actually also for President Trump's ability to pick good justices for the Supreme Court, because not only is this a repudiation of the notion that you can have an executive branch, the presidency, making the law, it also has some very powerful language in there that I think, even though this is not a Second Amendment case per se, Vince, this will have a major implication for Second Amendment cases down the road, including on attempts by certain blue states to ban AR-15s and semi-automatic rifles. So this is a major victory for the Second Amendment and the gun rights community today. There is just no way around it. The whole thing looks great. No complaints at all from the Second Amendment space. It is really an incredible decision. And what's interesting, Vince, is if you listen to the oral argument, there was some concern that the Supreme Court was a little unclear about how these bump stocks worked and what it meant technologically speaking. But if you look at the opinion, Vince, they literally broke down the details of the technology of firearms with diagrams and everything else, and they really nailed it, and they got it right. So applause is deserving of this U.S. Supreme Court, and of course to the three picks by President Trump: Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh.
So where this comes from, just to bring everyone back in time, it was Las Vegas 2017, that horrific shooting on the country concert there from the Mandalay Bay. And as a result of that, the shooter in that case apparently used bump stocks when firing those weapons. That's what led so much national consciousness to this particular accessory. And it was the Trump administration-led ATF that decided just to change what they consider to be a, quote, machine gun to include anything that has a bump stock, thus banning bump stocks. That brought us all the way to today, correct?
Yeah, that's essentially right, Vincent. And what's interesting is, and there's much debate about this. Now, I, of course, did not support, a bump stock ban. I thought it made no sense for a whole host of reasons. But what's quite interesting, if you go back in time to that event, there was concern that Congress might enact a law that would ban bump stocks. Now, it wasn't that bump stocks themselves were a big deal. This is kind of a range toy that people use on gun ranges and all that. The concern was that if Congress tried to redefine what a machine gun was to encompass bump stocks, no one knew the repercussions of Congress redefining a machine gun, which is a definition that's been on the books since the 1930s. And there was great concern among the Second Amendment community, Vince, that by redefining machine guns, they would do it in such a broad, terrible way that it would wind up inadvertently banning other things that were not intended.
Right.
So the Trump
like regular semi-automatic guns. If Congress was to start to come up with a classification that, it's a machine gun because you can fire it too quickly, then they might thus try and start banning semi-automatic weapons under the same rubric, right?
You're absolutely right, Vincent. One thing that's not in the definition of machine guns under federal law is the speed or the rate of fire. And the whole argument by the ATF in this case of Cargill versus Garland was that, this allows you to fire guns fast. And of course, the Supreme Court points out, people can fire guns fast if you pull the trigger fast. So right. That's not an essential characteristic of a machine gun. Machine guns are something that, again, a single pull of the trigger by itself causes the gun to keep firing till it's empty. And that's not the case here with these bump stocks, because you actually require, as you know, Vince, multiple maneuvers by a human being. You got to hold the trigger. You got to lean forward on the gun and pull the foregrip. There's all sorts of things you have to do physically with the gun to make this keep firing.
Yes.
And again, the Supreme Court said, hey, it's a single function of the gun, not multiple functions of the person.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, that's why, you read the justices in the majority here, they're pointing directly to the statutory language is crystal clear. You pull the trigger once, you maintain it, the bullets keep firing. That's what they're talking about when they mean a machine gun. That is not what's happening with a semi-automatic rifle that has a bump stock on it.
Exactly right. And that's where the struggle was. Now, people forget that during oral argument, Justice Brown Jackson's talking about the possibility, I think, firing 800 rounds a second. So sort of the ignorance of firearms technology was literally all over the oral argument. But if you read this opinion, it's pretty clear that the Supreme Court did its homework carefully. I know during oral argument, Justice Barrett was specifically saying that she watched a whole host of videos about how these bump stocks work, and she asked a series of hypotheticals. Well, these bump stocks are not even needed, right? You can literally bump fire a semi-automatic rifle with your belt loop and with rubber bands and all sorts of other things. And she's just like, this doesn't seem to make sense. And this, by the way, we have to remember that the ATF for many, many years said that bump stocks were perfectly fine. They clearly are not machine guns. They're perfectly legal. It was only this about face. And the Supreme Court today talks about that. They're like, look, this is like an abrupt 180-degree change. You made all these people that were law-abiding Americans felons overnight. Like, what are you doing? And the reason why I think this is such a big decision going forward, it really is showing that the Supreme Court is not going to let these administrative agencies, convert ordinary Americans into felons overnight by changing their interpretation of the law. They say, look, if Congress wants to do it, so be it, but you can't change your interpretation midstream and throw people in prison.
So I want to explore this a little bit more, in particular, like kind of the constitutionality of all this. As you point out, this is not really a Second Amendment case. It was really about the statutory text itself. And so, this is not something that the executive branch can just make up according to our Constitution. So the court ruling correctly on that front. Justice Alito, in his concurring opinion today, was really emphasizing, look, this suggests that Congress needs to deal with it, so Congress can do it if they want to. Is it your view are there any Second Amendment questions that arise here in banning accessories like bump stocks? Does this run afoul of the Second Amendment if Congress does it at all?
Well, of course, you're absolutely right that today's decision does not speak directly to the Second Amendment. And the Justice Alito concurrence was really just kind of a regurgitation of the old famous song, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill, right? You start with the Congress, it goes to the president. You know how it is. The Congress passes the laws, and the president enforces the laws. The courts interpret the laws. And that's all the Alito concurrence says, that, look, if you want to ban something, Congress, then let Congress do it. You can't ban stuff just by the president waving the magic wand. That's all the concurrence says. Now, is there a Second Amendment issue? Yeah, I think there quite very well could be, that if down the road Congress decided to ban a bump stock, I think there are legitimate Second Amendment arguments that, it's the sort of thing that impacts how a gun functions, and thus you could argue that if it's in common use by Americans for lawful purposes, it's protected, cannot be banned.
Right.
But again, we're nowhere near having to make that argument because I don't see Congress acting on bump stocks. The other interesting thing, Vince, here, and again, I'm not saying I'm an expert on the Las Vegas shooting, but I can tell you in my research that I've looked at this, it's not clear to me that the guns that, and some people have this debate out there, but if you wanted to ban bump stocks today in Congress, I think you'd have to have hearings on this. Did the Las Vegas shooter actually use the guns with the bump stocks or not? He certainly was found with guns with bump stocks, but I'm not sure we know for a fact that he used the guns with bump stocks to fire to commit his terrible mass shooting. And again, if you want to start re-engaging on this issue, the first question is, well, did the guy even use the bump stock laden guns? I'm not sure that's been fully and completely answered yet from what I've seen. So that would be the first question. Did the guy even use it or not? And if he did, well, we can talk about it. If he didn't, well, then, what's the point of banning the bump stocks? Again, these are things that people use for fun.
Yeah, that seems legitimate. Although, of course, there is some appetite. Of course, once again today, I saw Sheldon Whitehouse indicate that they need to move quickly to congressionally ban these bump stocks. So there is some appetite on Capitol Hill today as a result of this ruling. But going back to this idea that if they start banning more accessories in Congress, it does seem that it would become an affront to the Second Amendment for any number of reasons. I mean, there are all sorts of important accessories that go on guns that increase their effectiveness, their accuracy, which makes the gun safer, by the way, if it's more accurate. Things like, so when do we get to the point where they're banning magazine sizes, banning certain sights, banning certain accessories that improve the quality of the firearm? That seems that if you decrease the effectiveness of the gun, you're directly attacking the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the Bruin decision and set aside even Heller for the moment, just look at the language in Bruin. It specifically says that anything that helps facilitate self-defense is basically protected under the Second Amendment. And again, scopes, red dots, sights, triggers, barrel shrouds, all these sorts of things help effectuate or facilitate a law-abiding citizen. And remember, that's the key metric here, right? How do law-abiding citizens use the firearms and things that help improve the use of firearms? And if it improves the ability to use firearms for things like self-defense among law-abiding Americans, that's the touchstone. It's not about what makes it easier or less hard or whatever for a criminal to misuse guns. The focus on constitutional rights is how do we protect citizens and their right to use these things lawfully? I mean, just because people can defame you or commit fraud doesn't mean we, engage in prior restraints and tell you to shut up because you might say something wrong under the First Amendment. We don't do that with the First Amendment. We certainly shouldn't do it with the Second Amendment. And the court's made that pretty clear that the focus is on law-abiding citizens and how they use guns and not on criminal thugs and how they misuse guns. It
is good. So in your view of the United States Supreme Court and all these rulings of late, do you think they're headed in the right direction here? My sense is that they are. They've done a lot to really restrain the excesses of the executive branch and trying to restore the obligations of passing laws to Congress, where, of course, the Constitution says it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think we're going through a period of constitutional restoration where the court is trying to slowly but surely, with these big cases, to restore American law from a place where it never should have left in the years and decades of liberal judicial activism that basically viewed the courts as just another legislative branch. If they couldn't get what they wanted in the we the people democracy, then they would just pass the baton to the courts, and the courts would give them the political or policy outcome that they desired. Gay marriage is a classic example where it was repeatedly rejected by we the people all across America at the federal level and so on. And next thing you know, you have a Supreme Court that, it just decides gay marriage is constitutional and is good. And that's the end of the debate. And this court, I think, is clearly saying there's an area for policymaking that should be done by the policymakers that are subject to the will of the people and can be voted in or voted out accordingly. And we are not going to do that. But we're going to make sure that you follow the law, and we're not going to let the president make the law and invade the province of Congress. And I think that's pretty clear what the Supreme Court is saying today, that if Congress wants to do something, that Congress should do it, and they'll pay the political price or not. You're not going to be able to get in through the back door with presidential action through the regulatory agency.
Meanwhile, the left, of course, construes all of this as a threat to, quote, democracy. But in principle, these decisions are actually restoring democratic principles every time they say, actually, no, this is up to the people, not up to the court.
Yes, I think when the left talks about we the people, they're really talking about the unelected bureaucrats, right? Whatever they're talking about is they want unelected bureaucrats at the ATF to set gun policy and not be subject to the votes because you can't vote out the civil servants. That's just the harsh reality of it. And yeah, we obviously know it's a slogan, but I'm not sure they mean it because whenever they get a decision that that they don't like by we the people, well, guess what? And last I checked, it was the left that was trying to keep Donald Trump off the ballots, which doesn't seem very democratic to me, but I know that doesn't speak to the ATF issues we're talking about today.
Yeah, no, it all comes from the same question, like thirst for power. Mark Smith, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and your wisdom as always. Constitutional attorney with the Four Boxes Diner YouTube channel. So great to have you with us.